The last theory of self that I want to go over is the Buddhist theory of non-self. Right? Not no self, but non-self. Right? Um, and this is what makes this theory interesting amongst all the ones about personal identity, is that it's the only one that does not adhere to the idea of immunity from error through misidentification. Right? In fact, where all the other ones, right, no matter what the case is, we cannot be mistaken about who we are because we don't misidentify ourselves as someone else. Um, for the Buddhist, the Buddhist, and for traditional Theravadan Buddhism in particular, right, it is actually precisely this identification of ourselves as anything that is a misidentification, right? And therefore that is an error. Right? It's not that there is no real self, it's that there is nothing there at all. So this gets us back into Buddhist metaphysics. Right? Remember, according to Buddhism, everything is shunyata. It's emptiness, nothingness. By itself, nothing does anything, right? And everything is ultimately empty. Um, Now, for Theravada Buddhism, the Buddhism as first proposed by, or first uh, given to us in the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha himself. The view, Gautama's view of the self is that it is a collection of 5 skandhas, right? Which together create functionally like a scaffold, right? A series of structures like relying upon each other to give us the experience, or to help build functionally the self. And these 5 skandhas are nama, name, uh, how you make division between self and world, right? Or naming things, giving them concrete identities. Rupa, form, the physical appearance and limitations of a thing, right? For example, this form is the cylinder, right? Um, there is praksha, perception, right? To perceive something. There is vijnana, which is consciousness or awareness more generally, right? Uh, and this is one of the skandhas. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Last one is feeling or discernment, right? So nama, naming things, is discerning them, but feeling is another one, right? Now, here's the thing. Each of these by itself does exactly what it is, right? Naming just discriminates. It discriminates indiscriminately, right? Without direction and without any sort of direction. Perception perceives everything and at once, right? Without any discernment, and therefore, in perceiving everything at once, it knows nothing. It perceives nothing. Um, Awareness just is aware if left to its own devices. Right? If by itself, it simply is awareness. Right? It's aware of everything and therefore of nothing. Right? The form of everything, well, everything has form, but if everything is all formed without any direction or ability to discern, it's nothing. The form itself is nothing, and so on and so forth. So each one by itself is empty. It's only with their interactions that you get the robustness of experience, including the experience of self. Right? So let's stick with perhaps the most concrete one, perception. Right? If perception by itself simply perceives everything and therefore nothing, right? Well, perception of perception, once you have awareness, you therefore have the awareness that something is being perceived. Right? If something is being perceived, then you know that perception is active. Right? More to the point, since perception is now has awareness to it, it now has direction. Right? Um, and let's do nama, naming or discerning objects. Right? Picking things out. Right? Add that to perception. Okay, now you can perceive, and you can and now it's not just perceiving, it's picking things out in the world, specific items and objects. Right? And so you perceive this over and above other objects. Right? You discern that this is a Red Bull. And again, perception, now gives meaning to rupa, form. Right? When you perceive, add perception to rupa, you know that this is a cylinder. Right? You perceive. It's more than just form itself. It's now knowledge. And this but you have to have awareness too. Otherwise, it's just blankly staring at something. The way that you do when you go cross-eyed. Right? If you just look at something until it loses all meaning, right? Or it loses all sense. That's a case of perceiving form without awareness. Right? You're not really taking anything in. You just are looking until you've gone cross-eyed, functionally. Right? That's a good example. Right? So each of these by itself does nothing. Right? It's only with the total interaction of all 5 skandhas that we get this sense of self, that we get this sense of me discerning the world, picking things out, perceiving, being aware of, right, the world. As an example of this, right, have you guys, I imagine you've seen, what is it, the human chair challenge, where everyone, right, sits down at like a 90-degree angle, right, or they lie down, right, they get their legs, they set their legs on the floor and they lie back with their knees bent 90 degrees on top of someone else's legs, right? And this way, everyone holds up everyone else, right? You get 4 people minimum to do this. I suppose you could do it with 3, but you need at least 3. But it's better with 4 or more, right? So imagine 5 people doing this. Imagine you being part of this. Right? You have feet firmly planted on the ground. You bend your legs 90 degrees at the knees, so like you're doing a wall sit, and then you lie down on top of someone else's knees who has done the same thing. Right? If you remove any one of the 5 people in this arrangement, the other 4 collapse. Right? The other 4 collapse, and what you're left with is nothing. Right? Without one of those things, you have nothing. And one of those things by itself is also nothing. It does not work. It does not function. In that way, right, since everything, according to the Buddhist, is ultimately empty, in that way, you too are misidentifying things. Right? You are committing an error in thinking that you are anything. Right? Because you, just as everyone else and everything else in this world, are nothing. Not as like a discouragement or an insult, you are emptiness itself. Right? To think that emptiness is full of something is an error. It's a misidentification.